The Linguaverse episode 7 Taboo and Transgression note on language. This episode discusses taboo words and forbidden expressions. Some may be considered explicit, offensive, or emotionally charged. They are included here purely for academic and reflective purposes, to illustrate how language works as a system of power, identity, and control. Welcome back to the Linguaverse. Every language has forbidden words, terms you don't say in polite company, names you avoid in public, subjects you're told never to touch. But what makes a word dangerous? Why does uttering it feel transgressive, liberating, or even life-threatening? The very concept of taboo shows us something crucial about language. Words are not just carriers of meaning. They are carriers of power. A dictionary may tell you what a word means, but only culture decides whether you can say it, when you can say it, and how much it will cost you. To study taboo is to study the edges of language itself, where speech touches the sacred, the obscene, the terrifying, and the unthinkable. It is also to study silence, the words swallowed, the names erased, the truths that must remain unspoken. In this episode, we will explore taboo and transgression not as curiosities, but as the boundary markers of linguistic life, where semantics, dictionary meaning, and pragmatics, contextual use, show us how words function. Taboos show us where words fracture. They reveal the lines societies draw between safety and danger, belonging and exile, purity and corruption. We will look at the origins of taboo and its anthropological roots, how words like death, universal and inevitable, can become unspeakable, the politics of silence, how authorities use forbidden speech to protect their own power, the role of transgression, why breaking taboos through art, comedy, or protest feels so electric, sacred language, the names of gods, mantras and silences treated with reverence, collective taboos, words policed by groups, used to exile or unite, and finally, how breaking the silence can be an act of liberation, healing, or transformation. This is not just an academic journey. It is also a personal one. Each of us carries words we were told never to speak, labels that cut too deep, phrases that still tighten the chest or sting the skin. To confront taboo is to confront the architecture of our own lives, to notice where silence has protected us and where it has imprisoned us. So let us begin at the root. What is taboo, and why does every culture invent forbidden words? The nature of taboo. The word taboo comes from the Polynesian term tapu, meaning sacred or prohibited. When European explorers encountered Polynesian cultures in the 18th century, they noticed rituals, objects, and words that could not be touched or spoken without consequence. The word entered English as taboo and quickly came to signify anything socially forbidden. Origins of the word. This etymology is telling. Taboo is not about the thing itself, but about its boundary. It is not that a word or act has inherent danger, but that culture marks it as dangerous, setting it apart. Taboo is less about objects than about relationships, about how communities regulate what may be said, done, or thought. The function of taboo anthropologists like Emil Durkheim and Mary Douglas argued that taboos serve a double purpose. 1. To protect the sacred. Certain names or rituals are set apart, untouchable, preserving their power. 2. To police the obscene. Certain acts or words are banned, preventing disruption of social order. In both cases, taboo is about maintaining boundaries between pure and impure, holy and profane, safe and dangerous, us and them. Language becomes the front line of these boundaries. Words are not neutral. They are policed, punished, and sometimes weaponized. To speak a taboo is to cross a line. Taboo as social glue. It may sound paradoxical, but taboos unite communities as much as they divide them. When a society collectively agrees that certain words must not be spoken, it reinforces shared values. The very act of silence binds people together. This is why breaking a taboo feels so destabilizing. It threatens the glue of the group. Whether it's swearing in church, questioning political dogma, or naming a family secret, taboo breaking feels disruptive because it exposes what was meant to remain hidden. Anchor example. Death. Few taboos are more universal than death. Semantically, the word death is straightforward, the end of life. But pragmatically, cultures wrap it in silence, euphemism, and ritual avoidance. In English, we say passed away, gone to a better place, or no longer with us. Rarely do we say bluntly she died. In some cultures, speaking the names of the dead is forbidden, believed to disturb spirits. In others, death is so sanitized that even funerals become celebrations of life, the word itself carefully avoided. Because death is not just a fact, it is a rupture. To name it directly is to stare into the abyss. Societies soften the word to soften its power. Death, and the nervous system here, the body knows, offers insight. To say death aloud triggers the nervous system. Heart rate increases. Breath shortens, muscles tense. Avoiding the word isn't just cultural, it's physiological. The body recoils from finality, from absence. This is why euphemisms feel safer. They give the body space. To say passed away is to cushion the nervous system. To say death is to confront it head on. Silence around death. But this silence has consequences. When families avoid the word, grief becomes unspeakable. When societies sanitize death, individuals feel unprepared to face it. Taboo protects us from pain, but it also prevents us from integrating reality. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I traced how childhood silences shape adulthood. If a child grows up in a family where death is never spoken of, they may carry that silence into their own adult relationships, unable to face loss directly. The taboo that once protected them becomes a prison. The politics of naming death taboo also serves authority. When governments report casualties or collateral damage instead of deaths, the avoidance sanitizes violence. Language shields power from accountability. Euphemism becomes a political tool. Here we glimpse how taboos are not just cultural but strategic. To forbid direct naming is to control perception. Personal reflection. I first noticed the taboo around death not in my own circle, but in public spaces, the way the media or institutions spoke. Headlines would say fatalities reported instead of people died. Hospitals used the phrase passed away peacefully as though directness might wound. Even teachers avoided the blunt word, speaking of people who had gone or were no longer with us. What struck me wasn't only the avoidance, but the choreography of it. Everyone understood what had happened, but the direct word was carefully dodged, as if saying it aloud might make the reality too heavy to bear. That was when I realized language doesn't just describe reality, it shields us from it, sometimes at the cost of clarity. Shadow emotions and death taboo unfiltered human, we can see how shadow emotions swirl around death taboos. Fear of naming the inevitable, shame in being too blunt, anger when euphemism feels dishonest, relief when silence finally breaks. The taboo of death is not only cultural but emotional. It protects but it also distorts. Reflection prompt. What's the first word you learned for death? Was it blunt, died or softened, passed away? Who taught you that word, and how did their face, tone or silence shape your understanding? Practical activity. For the next week, notice how people around you speak about death, in the news, in conversation, in films. Write down the phrases. Are they euphemisms? Are they direct? How does each version make your body feel? The politics of the forbidden first, we explored taboo as boundary, the unspeakable edges of life, nowhere clearer than with death itself. But taboo is not only about protecting us from existential terror, it is also about protecting systems of power. When we talk about the politics of taboo, we are talking about how societies decide which truths must remain hidden, which words are not to be spoken, and which realities must be softened, rebranded, or erased altogether. Taboos are not neutral, they are political tools, tools that regulate not only morality and belonging, but also obedience. And this is where semantics and pragmatics intertwine most dangerously. Semantics may give us the dictionary meaning of a word, but politics decides which word can even be spoken, and what connotation it will carry when it is. Pragmatics then embeds those decisions into daily life, until silence or distortion feels normal. The shifting landscape of taboos shift across time. What is forbidden in one era becomes commonplace in another, and vice versa. This alone shows us that taboos are not fixed truths, but cultural decisions. Blasphemy was once the ultimate forbidden word in many societies. To take the name of God in vain was punishable by death. Today, in most secular societies, religious swearing has lost much of its sting, replaced by obscenities tied to the body. Monarchy and authority were once beyond critique. To call a king a tyrant was unthinkable. Today, satire and political parody are mainstream entertainment. Sexuality and desire were once shrouded in silence. Words for anatomy were censored, acts unnamed. Today, openness and reclamation dominate cultural discourse, though taboos still shift depending on who speaks and where. The very fact that taboo changes show that it is never about inherent danger. It is about control. When power needs protection, language becomes the shield. Anchor example. Slavery to modern slavery to human trafficking. Few words illustrate this better than slavery. Semantically, slavery is clear. The ownership of human beings, the reduction of persons to property, enforced labor without autonomy. The word carries historical weight, chains, whips, plantations, colonialism, and centuries of generational trauma. But in contemporary discourse, slavery is often treated as a past tense phenomenon. Schoolbooks, political speeches, and cultural rituals frame it as something overcome, an evil of history, abolished and remembered, but not present. So what happens when slavery persists? What happens when, in the 21st century, millions remain trapped in forced labor, sexual exploitation, and debt bondage? The term shifts. We stop saying slavery and start saying human trafficking. Semantics of trafficking. At first glance, trafficking seems accurate. People being moved across borders for exploitation. But semantics matter. Traffic is a word we use for cars, goods, and logistics. It implies movement, flow, and transaction. Pragmatically, trafficking flattens the horror. It suggests mobility, not captivity. It frames people as moved, not as enslaved. It sounds bureaucratic, almost administrative, an issue for customs officers and border patrols rather than a raw violation of humanity. And this is not accidental. Language here functions as anesthesia. By rebranding slavery as trafficking, society dampens its urgency. The semantic shift removes the emotional charge. Somatic resonance. Slavery versus trafficking. Think about how your body responds to the two words. Slavery, the body tightens. Images of chains, forced labor, brutality, and ownership. A visceral recoil. Trafficking, the body registers logistics, movement networks, vehicles. The emotional punch is diluted. The nervous system knows the difference. Words don't just carry meanings, they carry physiological weight. To say slavery is to touch trauma. To say trafficking is to slide past it. And yet they name the same reality. Women are abducted into forced prostitution. Children coerced into labor. Men trapped by debt and violence. The word changes, but the brutality does not. The politics of silence. This is the politics of the forbidden, words rebranded to protect those in power. When slavery is framed as past, governments can celebrate abolition without addressing its persistence. When it is reframed as trafficking, the focus shifts to border control and international crime, leaving corporations, industries, and consumers unexamined. The semantic shift turns a systemic atrocity into a logistical issue. It makes accountability harder to demand. Survivors are not seen as enslaved people with rights denied, but as victims of illegal movement. The word itself minimizes. Here taboo is not silence alone. It is a distortion. It is the deliberate choice of softer words to blunt outrage. Historical parallels. This tactic is not new. History is filled with forbidden or softened language that protected power. Colonial massacres reframed as pacification campaigns. Wartime civilian deaths are hidden under collateral damage. Torture is renamed enhanced interrogation. Each of these shifts performs the same work, taking something morally intolerable and rebranding it in a way that makes it bureaucratically manageable. Semantics is the dictionary. Pragmatics is the cover story. Together, they protect power by hiding atrocity. In the Linguaverse, I wrote about how perception itself is engineered by those in control. Language is their most efficient tool. If you can rename reality, you can redirect outrage. In The Body Knows, I explored how the nervous system responds to truth and distortion. Here too we see it. Slavery stabs the body, trafficking glances off. Words regulate the nervous system as much as they regulate thought. In Unfiltered Human, I examined shadow emotions. When slavery is hidden under euphemism, anger is numbed, grief is displaced, and shame is shifted onto the victims. The emotional economy itself is restructured by semantics. And in My Inner Child Was Broken, I traced how childhood words shape identity. The same pattern is here. Euphemisms train us early to avoid discomfort, to soften the unsoftenable, to internalize silence. Society does this at scale with atrocities, the same way families do with secrets. Micro-reflection. Which words in your daily life feel deliberately softened? Do you hear downsizing instead of firing? Correctional facility instead of prison? Restructuring instead of collapse? What does your body feel when you swap euphemism for bluntness? Practical activity. Choose one euphemism currently in circulation. It could be political, corporate, or personal. 1. Write down the euphemism. 2. Write down its direct equivalent. 3. Notice which one feels heavier in your body. 4. Ask, who benefits from the softened word? Who is protected by the silence? Language is never neutral. The politics of the forbidden show us that even when words are spoken, they can be engineered to conceal. Transgression is spell-breaking. If taboo is the wall around forbidden speech, then transgression is the act of crossing it. To transgress is to step deliberately into the space where words are not supposed to go, to speak what is silenced, to name what is forbidden, to declare what others whisper. Transgression is dangerous, but it is also liberating. When someone breaks a taboo, they shatter not only the silence but the illusion of inevitability. They remind us that the line was drawn by culture, not by nature. This is why transgressive language feels electric, comedy that names the unspeakable, protest chants that defy authority, art that says aloud what others only feel. These moments shake the nervous system because they are not only about words, they are about power. To break a taboo is to show that language can undo the very structures it was meant to enforce. The charge of forbidden words. Why does saying a forbidden word feel so charged? Because the nervous system is conditioned to anticipate consequences. Physiological response. The heart quickens, breath shortens, muscles tighten. This is the somatic memory of punishment, shame, or exile associated with breaking taboos. Social anticipation. To break taboo is to risk sanction, ridicule, exclusion, censorship, and even violence. The body knows the cost before the mind processes it. Liberatory release. And yet when spoken, the forbidden word often brings relief. The tension releases. The silence breaks. What was heavy in the body becomes air. This is the paradox. Taboo silences to protect order, but transgression liberates by revealing that the silence was constructed. Anchor example. Activist few words embody this paradox like activist. Semantically, it is neutral, someone engaged in activism. Yet pragmatically, its meaning shifts dramatically depending on who says it, where and why. To some, an activist is a badge of honor, someone courageous, committed, willing to speak truth to power. To others, activist is a slur, a troublemaker, radical, extremist. The same word functions as praise and condemnation. The difference lies in the mouth that speaks it, the transgression of naming oneself. When someone calls themselves an activist, they claim a transgressive identity. They step into a space defined by resistance. They refuse to remain silent or compliant. To be an activist is to speak what institutions prefer unsaid, to protest what governments prefer to keep hidden, to demand justice where silence has been the norm. This is why activists are often vilified. Their very existence exposes taboo. Their speech breaks spells. Case study: civil rights. During the civil rights movement in the United States, to be called an activist was often synonymous with being called a criminal. Protesters were branded agitators, disturbers of peace. The taboo was not only racial injustice itself, but also the language that named it. By calling themselves activists, leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and countless unnamed participants transgressed the cultural script. They refused silence. Their words, "I have a dream, we shall overcome," became spells of liberation, precisely because they were spoken against the prohibition of taboo. Case study: environmental movements. In more recent decades, environmentalists have faced similar dynamics. To some, they are activists protecting the earth. To others, they are eco-terrorists obstructing progress. Here we see how taboo shifts. The unspeakable is not only the destruction of the environment, but also the act of naming and resisting it. To call oneself an activist in this context is to accept the weight of transgression. The somatic charge of activism breaking silence carries a bodily charge. Chanting in protest synchronizes heartbeats. Standing with a sign, voice raised, floods the system with adrenaline. Fear of arrest mingles with pride in resistance. The word activist condenses this experience. It is not a label applied after the fact. It is a living signal of transgression, a word that carries the heartbeat of protest. Language, as spell-breaking taboo, works because words are withheld. Transgression works because words are released. This is the spell-breaking power of language. To name injustice is to expose it. To declare identity is to resist erasure. To chant forbidden truths is to loosen the hold of silence. Activism is linguistic as much as it is physical. The body gathers, but the tongue shouts. The signs are written. The chants repeat. The forbidden becomes visible. In the Linguaverse, I explored how perception itself is shaped by language. Activists disrupt that architecture, revealing cracks in its foundations. In The Body Knows, I showed how the nervous system records both silence and expression. Activism embodies this. Fear contracts the body, but speech releases it. In Unfiltered Human, I worked with shadow emotions. Activism channels anger, grief, and shame into words that transgress silence. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I traced how early prohibitions train us to stay quiet. Activism is, in some ways, the reclamation of that silenced child, speaking what was once forbidden. Reflection prompt: have you ever been called an activist, with pride or with contempt? How did your body respond? Did the word feel like a weight or a liberation? Practical activity: choose one issue you care about but rarely speak aloud. Write a single declarative sentence about it, as though you were chanting it in public. Notice what happens in your body. Does your chest tighten? Does your breath catch? Do you feel fear, anger, or release? This exercise shows you where taboo lives in your nervous system, and how transgression can also mean liberation. Sacred speech and silence. Not all taboos are about obscenity, shame, or avoidance. Some are about reverence. Some words are not forbidden because they degrade, but because they elevate. They are set apart, spoken only in ritual, whispered only in prayer, or held in silence as too holy for ordinary tongues. This is the other side of taboo, sacred speech. Where obscene taboos protect society from disruption, sacred taboos protect mystery from dilution. They remind us that words are not only communicative tools, they are vibrations, carriers of spirit, conduits between the human and the divine. The sacred syllable few sounds capture this more powerfully than Om. In Hinduism, Buddhism, and many other spiritual traditions, Om is not merely a syllable. It is regarded as the primordial vibration, the sound of creation itself. To chant Om is to align the body and mind with the universe. Semantically, Om is simple, just 2 letters in English transliteration, but pragmatically, its weight is immeasurable. Spoken at the beginning and end of mantras, meditations, and rituals, it signals sacred entry and closure. The power of Om is not in its dictionary definition, but in its resonance. The hum vibrates through the chest, the skull, the breath. The sound doesn't just leave the tongue. It travels back into the body, creating somatic feedback. The chanter feels themselves become part of the vibration. The body remembers sacred sound here. The insights of the body knows are clear. Language is not abstract, it is embodied. To chant Om is to feel the nervous system slow, the vagus nerve stimulated by the resonance. Breath deepens, muscles release, heart rate steadies. This is not magic in the fantastical sense. It is biology in dialogue with tradition. Sacred sounds are technologies of regulation. Cultures preserve them as taboo, not only because of reverence, but because they work. Sacred speech calms chaos, it protects the psyche. It anchors the self in something larger. Silence is sacred, but sometimes the most sacred act is not to speak at all. Across traditions, silence itself is treated as holy. Monks take vows of silence, believing that abstaining from speech draws them closer to the divine. Meditation traditions honor silence as the ground of awareness, the space from which words arise and into which they dissolve. In indigenous ceremonies, silence is an absence but presence, a listening to land, ancestors, spirits. Here, silence functions as the highest form of language. It is not emptiness but fullness. By withholding words, one opens space for what words cannot reach. Sacred taboo versus obscene taboo. It is important to distinguish sacred taboos from obscene ones. Obscene taboos suppress what is disruptive. Profanity slurs obscenity. Sacred taboos preserve what is precious. Mantras, divine names, holy silence. Both operate by prohibition. Both mark language as dangerous, but one marks danger in terms of harm, the other in terms of power. To speak what is obscene risks breaking society. To speak what is sacred risks diminishing the divine. The politics of sacred speech, even sacred taboos, are not free from politics. History shows us that when a word is made sacred, institutions often claim ownership of it. Ritual speech becomes restricted to priests, chants monopolized by clergy, divine names guarded by gatekeepers. Sacred language, then, can both elevate and exclude. It can connect individuals to transcendence, but it can also restrict access, centralizing spiritual authority. This is where the Linguaverse offers perspective. Even the sacred can be used as architecture of control. When only certain people are permitted to speak sacred words, the boundary between reverence and power becomes blurred. Personal observation. The first time I encountered outside of books, I was struck by how different it felt from ordinary speech. It wasn't about what the sound meant, but about what it did. The room seemed to shift as voices blended. The vibration wasn't just heard, it was carried through the chest and bones. That was when I realized some words aren't about semantics at all. They are about resonance. Shadow and light, from the perspective of unfiltered human, sacred silence and sacred speech also have shadows. The silence of reverence can slip into the silence of avoidance. The protection of the divine can blur into censorship. A word too holy to utter may also become a word weaponized to exclude. This tension is important. Sacred taboos elevate language, but they also remind us that reverence and repression sometimes sit side by side. Reflection prompt. Which words in your life feel sacred? Is it a prayer, a name, a phrase whispered in intimacy? How does your body respond when you speak it? And how does it feel when you hold it in silence? Practical activity. Spend 5 minutes each morning this week chanting a single word or sound that feels grounding. It could be Om, it could be your own name, it could even be silence itself. Notice how your body changes in response, your breath, your heart rate, your sense of presence. Collective taboos, group identity and control anchor. Heresy. So far, we've looked at taboo as individual silence, death, political distortion, slavery trafficking, transgressive resistance, activist, and sacred reverence. But taboo is not only personal or institutional. It also functions collectively, binding groups together. Every community, whether religious, political, or social, creates its own lexicon of words that must not be spoken. These collective taboos serve as tests of belonging. To say the wrong word or to refuse the right one is to risk exile. This is how taboo becomes a tool of group identity and control. Heresy as anchor. Few words illustrate this better than heresy. Semantically, heresy means deviation from accepted doctrine, especially religious doctrine. But pragmatically, it functions as a social weapon. To call someone a heretic is not just to accuse them of false belief, but to mark them as dangerous, untrustworthy, and an outsider. Historically, the cost of being labeled a heretic was not only social exile but death. From the medieval Inquisition to witch trials, the accusation itself carried lethal weight. But even outside religion, the pattern repeats. In political movements, activist circles, or online communities, the language of heresy lives on under new names. Traitor, fake news spreader, conspiracy theorist. The word changes, but the mechanism is the same. Collective taboo as cohesion. Why do groups need taboos? Because taboos create cohesion. A community defines itself not only by what it says, but by what it refuses to say. Silence becomes a badge of membership. To question certain dogmas, to name certain truths, is to risk separation from the collective. In religious contexts, questioning scripture may be forbidden. In political contexts, criticizing the party line may be taboo. In cultural contexts, naming uncomfortable histories may be suppressed. The forbidden binds the group together. To stay silent is to belong. To speak is to fracture. Modern forms of heresy today, few people are burned at the stake for heresy. Yet the dynamics persist. Consider these modern equivalents. Conspiracy theorist. The label functions as a contemporary form of heresy. It marks someone as outside rational discourse, unworthy of serious attention. The term itself creates taboo. To question certain narratives risks social exile. Cancel culture. Communities, especially online, enforce taboos by ostracizing those who speak forbidden words. Whether fair or excessive, the dynamic mirrors the historical punishment of heretics, political betrayal. To step outside party loyalty, to criticize from within, is often framed as betrayal. The taboo is not against the act itself, but against breaking collective silence. Heresy may change names, but its function remains, policing the boundary of the group. Somatic weight of collective taboos are not only intellectual but visceral. The body knows when speech risks exile. The nervous system tightens before words leave the tongue. Heartbeats quicken in meetings when someone considers raising a forbidden question. This is the bodily charge of collective taboo. Speech carries the risk of losing belonging, and our physiology is wired to fear isolation. Silence, therefore, is often safer than honesty. Connection to your work in the Linguaverse, I explored how societies construct invisible architectures of control. Collective taboo is one of those architectures. Groups police themselves through silence. In The Body Knows, the theme was how memory and meaning are embedded in flesh. Collective taboo is somatic, belonging, and exile felt directly in the body. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I traced how family secrets create internal taboos. Communities mirror this, unspeakable truths carried across generations. In Unfiltered Human, I gave space to shadow emotions. Many of those emotions, envy, rage, and shame, are taboo not only personally but collectively. Reflection prompt. What are the heresies in your community? Which subjects cannot be questioned without risk of exile? How does your body respond when you even think about raising them? Practical activity. This week, notice conversations where silence speaks louder than words. 1. Write down what was said. 2. Then write down what was not said, the forbidden subjects hovering beneath. 3. Reflect. Is the silence protecting the group, or is it imprisoning it? Transgression and liberation taboo silences. It constrains thought, shapes belonging, and regulates emotion. But transgression, the deliberate act of breaking taboo, has always been one of humanity's most powerful tools for liberation. To transgress is not simply to rebel. It is to restore language where silence has been enforced. It is to reclaim power from those who dictate what can and cannot be spoken. When taboos are broken collectively, they don't just destabilize order, they build new worlds. This part explores transgression not as obscenity for its own sake, but as a pathway to freedom. Linguistic acts that heal, empower, and reweave communities. 1. Breaking silence, as healing history shows that some of the most transformative social movements began with the breaking of taboos. Civil rights movement. To say I am equal in a segregated society was transgressive. To shout Black Lives Matter decades later was a continuation of this linguistic reclamation. These were not just political slogans, but spells of liberation, spoken into a world that denied their validity. Feminist movements. Words like patriarchy, rape culture, and misogyny were once unspeakable in mainstream discourse. Naming them shattered the silence. Suddenly, what had been lived individually as shame or fear became visible as systemic injustice. LGBTQ+ rights. For decades, queer identities were taboo. To say I am gay, I am lesbian, I am trans was to risk violence and exile. Yet each declaration transgressed silence, creating space where freedom could grow. In each case, breaking the silence was not only rebellion, it was healing. It reconnected individuals to their own voices and wove those voices together into collective chants that shifted history. 2. When the tongue restores power on the personal level, transgression is just as potent. Survivors of trauma often live in silence for years, sometimes decades. Words like rape, abuse, violence carry such somatic charge that the body refuses them. Euphemisms or avoidance phrases take their place. The act of naming, to finally say aloud, I was raped, I was abused, I was silenced, is often described as liberatory, even when terrifying. The tongue becomes the instrument of reclamation. What was once buried in shame is brought into light, where it can no longer be controlled from the shadows. Language restores power because it transforms the unspeakable into the spoken. Silence fractures, and with it, the hold of taboo. 3. The nervous system of liberation. Why does speaking forbidden words feel so liberating? Because taboo breaking is physiological. When someone finally names what they were told to suppress, the body reacts. Adrenaline surges as fear anticipates punishment. Breath quickens, then releases as the word lands. Tears, shaking, laughter often follow, the nervous system discharging years of suppression. This is the body remembering and then releasing. Transgression frees not only the tongue but the flesh. Consider movements like Me Too. Millions broke the silence simultaneously. The collective nervous system shifted. What once felt too dangerous to say became survivable, then powerful, then unstoppable. Liberation is somatic. It begins in words, but it is completed in the body's release. 4. Transgression that creates belonging. Not all transgressions are isolated. Sometimes breaking taboo creates new belonging. Chants, protests, and slogans often center around once forbidden words. By repeating them together, groups transform shame into solidarity. Black Lives Matter was once called radical, even heretical. Today it is a global refrain. Me Too was taboo breaking in its simplicity, two words that created belonging for survivors worldwide. Love is Love reclaimed queer identity from silence into affirmation. These acts show how transgression scales. A single voice risks exile. 1,000 voices chanting together become unignorable. The word itself transforms into community. 5. The double edge of liberation, yet taboo breaking is not without risk. Not all acts of transgression heal. Some provocations exploit taboo for shock, not liberation. Shock jock comedians, propaganda campaigns, or demagogues often weaponize transgression to destabilize, confuse, or harm. Backlash is real. History is full of figures punished for speaking too soon, too boldly. Not every act of speech is met with acceptance. Some are crushed to preserve the old order. This is the double edge. Transgression can free, but it can also wound. The line between liberation and provocation is not always clear. But even so, taboo breaking shifts the landscape. Once spoken, words cannot be unspoken. Even failed transgressions ripple. They remind the collective that silence is not inevitable. 6. Liberation as world-making. The deepest power of linguistic transgression is that it creates new worlds. When enslaved people sang spirituals coded with messages of escape, they were transgressing silence, building worlds of hope within oppression. When women declared the personal is political, they redrew the map of discourse itself. When indigenous activists reclaim ancestral languages once banned, they do more than revive words. They restore entire ways of being. Each act of linguistic transgression opens space for new realities. Language does not just describe the world, it builds it. To break taboo is to build differently. Reflection prompt. What word have you spoken that once terrified you, but afterwards felt like freedom? Was it a declaration of identity, a truth you hid, or a phrase you thought no one would accept? Practical activity. Choose one word or phrase you currently avoid. It may be personal, political, or spiritual. 1. Write it down in full. 2. Say it aloud in a private space. 3. Notice your body's reaction, tension, release, heat, and stillness. 4. Reflect. What part of you feared this word, and what part of you feels freed by it? Breaking taboo doesn't always require a crowd. Sometimes liberation begins with a single whispered word, and the courage to let it echo. The double life of taboo. As we draw this exploration to a close, it is worth pausing to see the larger pattern that has emerged. Taboo is not one thing. It is not always obscene, nor always sacred. It shifts its mask depending on the needs of power, the fears of the community, and the hidden weights of the human psyche. In this episode, we have seen taboo as silence around death, distortion around slavery, stigma around activism, reverence around sacred syllables, control around heresy, and finally liberation through transgression. These are not separate categories, but interwoven threads. Each one reveals something essential about the relationship between language and life. Taboo is, at its root, a recognition that words are dangerous. To speak them is to risk consequences. That danger may come from society's exile, ridicule, and punishment. It may come from within, shame, fear, somatic contraction. Or it may come from beyond, the sense that sacred power itself could be diminished by casual repetition. But the very fact that words can be dangerous reminds us of their potency. A word that carries no weight cannot be taboo. Only words that matter, that touch deep nerves of culture, identity, or spirit, ever become forbidden. So the paradox is this: taboo both imprisons and reveals. It hides, yet in hiding it points to what a culture most fears or most reveres. And when broken, taboo does more than shock. It liberates energy that has been suppressed. It releases truths too long contained. It heals wounds by naming them. It builds new worlds by giving voice to what was silenced. In this way, taboo is not only a limit but also an invitation. Every forbidden word is a question. Why can't this be spoken? What power does it hold? And what might happen if we speak it anyway? The mirror of the listener. To make this reflection personal, think back through the words we've touched. Death, slavery, activist heresy, liberation. How do they feel in your body now, compared to when you first heard them in this episode? Perhaps some tightened your chest. Others may have stirred anger. Some may have carried a surprising calm, a reverence. These responses are not random. They are the somatic echoes of cultural scripts, personal history, and nervous system conditioning. This is why taboo is never only about the collective. It is also intimate. The words you avoid, the phrases you whisper, the terms that send shivers down your spine, these map the hidden terrain of your psyche. To explore taboo is to explore yourself. Activity. Naming the forbidden. For this final activity, we will bring together the threads of semantics, meaning, pragmatics, context, embodiment, somatic response, and collectivity, shared speech. Step 1. Identify a taboo word. Choose a word or phrase that you avoid. It may be personal, failure, grief, cultural, slavery, activism, or spiritual, God, death, desire. Write it at the top of a page. Step 2. Semantic layer. Write its dictionary definition. Strip it of connotation. What does it literally mean? Step 3. Pragmatic layer. Write how it is used in your world. Who speaks it? Who avoids it? What happens when it is spoken aloud in public, in your family, or in your own thoughts? Step 4. Somatic layer. Now say the word aloud. Notice your body. Breath, chest, throat, jaw. Write down sensations. Tightness, heat, relief, release. Step 5. Collective layer. Imagine the word chanted by a crowd, whispered in ritual, shouted in protest. How does its meaning change when it shifts from your private voice to a collective one? Step 6. Integration. Reflect. Is this word a prison or a doorway? Does it silence, or could it liberate? If it terrifies you, what truth might it carry that is waiting to be reclaimed? Why this practice matters. This activity is not only intellectual, it is a way of reclaiming power. Taboo thrives on silence and vagueness. By naming the forbidden, by exploring its layers, you turn what was shadow into something visible. And once visible, it can be worked with, transformed, or even healed. It is also a practice of compassion, for when you notice how a word has been distorted, softened, or weaponized, you begin to see how others, too, are bound by taboos. You see the cultural scripts at work, the collective nervous systems that tremble or freeze at certain syllables. And in recognizing this, you open space not only for your own liberation, but for the liberation of others, toward reclaiming the tongue. As we close, let us look forward. If taboo is about silence, then transgression is about speech. If taboo is about power's control, then transgression is about reclaiming the tongue. In our next exploration, we will step directly into that act of reclamation. But here, at the edge of taboo, the lesson is already clear. Language is never neutral. Words wound and heal, imprison and liberate, conceal and reveal. To understand taboo is to understand where a culture places its boundaries and where you might choose to step beyond them. Until next time, stay curious, stay awake to your own language, and remember, silence can be a prison, but it can also be a prayer. You've been listening to the Linguaverse. James Miller.